Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Fruition Group's Diary of a CIO podcast. I'm delighted to welcome our guest this morning, Kevin Judge. Hi, Kevin.
Good morning, Sarah. How are you doing?
Great, thank you. A quick intro to Kevin before we delve into some questions. Kevin is a hands-on, commercially driven technology leader with extensive experience delivering large-scale technology transformation across multiple sectors, including retail, travel, hospitality, logistics, and e-commerce. Having worked from some leading consumer brands such as Jet2, Bourne Leisure, Tastecard, Hermes, and Asda. That's quite an accolade of companies there. Kevin began his career as a software engineer and now operates at the intersection of technology and strategy, recently focusing on the business to consumer sector and private equity owned businesses. In his spare time, Kevin is a Liverpool fan, delighted with your result this season. He has two not teenage daughters anymore, two daughters who are at university and college. He's sports mad, enjoys watching all sports and also taking part in golf and cycling. So welcome, Kevin. Hopefully I didn't miss anything off the intro there.
No, that was a good rendition. Thank you.
Good stuff. So we'll start off this morning, if it's okay, talking a bit about your career journey and leadership experience. And I try and always ask the same question of our guests to kind of kick off this podcast. I just wondered, was there a kind of pivotal moment for you in your career, a kind of a cross-section where you knew the CTO, C-Tech level leadership path was right for you? And was there a kind of decision that you had to make to get there?
I think it's quite interesting. I think back to the early days of my career. I never envisaged myself working in technology at all. At school, I wasn't really that bothered about school, if I'm honest. I'm not the archetypal, go through, get great grades, go off to university, etc. I actually left school and played football for 2 years as an apprentice.
Right.
Broke my ankle, then had a massive rethink to do about what I was going to do in my life. At that time, my dad was still in the Air Force down south in Buckinghamshire, and I sort of worked in bars on the RAF camp. I sold Kirby cleaners, the big vacuums that are about £1,200. I was actually really good at that, believe it or not, but then realised that probably wasn't a career choice for the rest of my life. I then had a real sort of, when they say you've got a crossroads moment in your life, I stood on a corner at a literal crossroads with a job working for the equivalent of sports division back then, which would have been sort of like a sports direct now. And then turned to the right was a course learning office skills, which kind of shows you how old I am. So learning about Word and Excel, how to do all of those things that were just really coming into sort of mainstream offices. I then took the turning right, thank God, and went to this office skills, got placed at Sony Music, which was just down the road from me, and then started getting into sort of accounting and wanting to do sort of accountancy. Moved from Sony to a pub company who owned about 1,600 pubs up and down the country. Did a real sort of pivotal role there within the business, hooking lots of departments together. And then it wasn't until I stood outside one day, I was actually coming back from lunch, and I saw two guys pull into the car park with Fiat Turbos, which I quite liked in those days. And they were one number plate apart. And I thought, where the hell do these guys work? I've never seen them before. And so I followed them into the building and they went up to the third floor. And I was like, what goes on up here? So I was just asking around, like, what do you guys do? And it was like, this was IT. So I was like, right, okay, I need to figure out how I get myself into IT, proper mercenary stuff. So anyway, I did a bit of research. There was a new IT director started a couple of weeks later who I bumped into and basically said, what you should do is get somebody to learn how to program who understands the business so that we can build the right systems for people. And he was like, that's a really good idea. About 2 weeks later, I saw a job posted on the internal notice board, which was the job that I basically created, and I put my name in the ring for that. Had to do loads of psychometric tests and things like that to sort of prove that I might have the capacity to do it. And then eventually ended up getting the job. 3 other people applied for it, so I was kind of like, hold on, this is my job. Like, why are other people applying for it? Got that job, and then really had to sort of teach myself how to code. And back in those days, it was horrible. Black and green screen stuff, RPG, report program generator, which was horrible to learn. And then, I just, because I'm really competitive. I want to be the best at anything that I do. I would just literally take books home at the end of, at the end of the week and spend all weekend coding and try and teach myself to be the best that I could. Moved from there to a small software house where I learned loads. And then it was just a sort of real progression through the ranks, into sort of senior developer, leading teams. Back in those days, there weren't really sort of big roles to move into. A CIO and CTO, there wasn't like too many of those roles around other than in massive businesses. So it wasn't really until I'd done maybe about 7-8 years of sort of leading tech teams that there was a kind of progression where you had to think about, like, either you can go down the architecture route and keep being technical and hands-on, or you can move into sort of more bigger leadership roles. And at that time, it frightened the life out of me because I couldn't see any value in the things that the non-techie leaders were doing. Like, what did they do all day? What, they sat in meetings talking about stuff? It's like, that's not creating anything. It's not like contributing to the products that we're building or the business that like, what is it that they actually do? And it wasn't really until I moved probably to Jet2 for my first stint that I saw, actually, there's a business here that needs this kind of role. And as I sort of progressed more into stakeholder management and working closely with people and understanding what the business needed and aligning sort of roadmaps and strategies to that way, that's when I started to think, actually, there might be a bit of a niche role here for me. And then sort of hanging the keyboard up suddenly became something that I was okay with, because even when I was still moving into management, I was still making sure that I could code just in case it all failed and I had to go back to sort of doing coding. So I don't think there was ever a moment where I thought, that's it for me, but it was a steady sort of progression towards that, that way of thinking and the way of leading people. I'd always been someone who would take the initiative of things. If somebody didn't know something or if somebody needed to talk to somebody from a different team, I would be the one that was sent over to, make contact and be nice about things. And I guess I just sort of emanated towards that, mainly probably because of my sporting background. I'd sort of captained teams and things like that, so I'd always had that kind of thing of I want to be at the forefront of what we're doing and really lead it. So I think that's kind of my journey up until now.
What a great story, and some really important life lessons that perhaps some people that are watching this that are at the start of their technology career could really learn from. Opportunities don't necessarily come and knock at your door. You've got to make things happen in the way that you did with talking to that person about creating a role. And I love what you said about not hanging up your keyboard and making sure that your skills were still there and up to date whilst you took a chance on going in a different direction. And having a fallback plan is always really important. So that's a great story.
It's often very difficult as well when you've got like teenage daughters going through, GCSEs and stuff, and you're sitting them down and saying, listen, this is really important, you've got to do, and they go, well, you've done all right and you didn't, and you kind of I'm not the example.
Absolutely. So your roles have spanned both sort of scale-up organisations. The Tastecard story was a brilliant story. I remember that organisation and watching them from afar. But, through to large corporates working for organisations like Asda and Jet2. And what are the biggest contrasts in terms of how you lead in each of those different environments, from a Tastecard to an Asda? And how do you adapt?
I think it's really important. So I'm not someone who sort of judges their success and their kind of career on, I want to lead this big, massive team. And a lot of the time, so say, for instance, when I've gone into to Warner, I've gone from leading a team of 350 people at Jet2, based in 3 different locations, in India and Leeds and Sheffield, to having, 10 people in Hemel Hempstead. And you're kind of like, well, what's the appeal of doing that? Well, the appeal for me is really that I can take things and make them bigger and make them and shape them. So having that opportunity to actually go in, see what people you've got, see what it is that you're trying to solve, and then actually figure out the puzzle from getting you to from A to B is really what I enjoy. I've been through lots of organizational change, whether it's just business change or just IT change. My role at Asda, for instance, was very much I went in at a certain level knowing I was going to be moved up very shortly. That happened a lot quicker than I was told it was going to happen. It was going to be sort of like 6, 8, maybe 18 months. Within 3 months, it was like, right, here's your new role, here's your new team. There was 120 people. You now need to make that 90 people within 3 months. And it was like, wow, that's a big challenge. So I think having sort of been there, seen it, done it on lots of different levels, it's a lot of the things that you learn about, it's all about people. It's all about having the right people, doing the right things, interfacing with the business, understanding the business. So I tend to spend, time understanding each role within the business, or each area at least. Lots of my roles have included, or if you look back through most of my career, they're all sort of operational businesses with customer focus. So there's a big operation on the side of every IT team that I've worked with, and understanding how those operational teams work is really, really key to making the IT bit a success.
Sure. So for you, an opportunity to be interesting isn't about the size and scale of the organization or the infrastructure. It's about the challenge and the transformation that either at a business or a tech level that organization's going through. That's what makes it interesting. Is that fair
absolutely.
To say?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think it's probably what makes most people really enjoy IT. I'm really, really sort of fortunate that I found something that changes on a regular basis. And it changes too quickly sometimes. But yeah, that having that constant, every day is different. There might be a different problem that you go into. You've always got to be on your mettle. There's operational things as well as things that you're trying to build a lot of the time. So it's that kind of quick change environment that really inspires me to sort of keep going and keep learning and keep adapting what I'm doing, and also working with some great people. So a lot of people in this who don't work in the IT industry don't quite understand the passion that people have for their jobs. And while the other parts of the business are kind of going, well, we need to make sure that people are around to do this, etc., etc. You kind of, as an IT person, you know that, if things go down on a Friday night, you know that you've got to stick around and fix them, right? It's just part of the role. So you kind of, but the people who have the passion for the role is what I look for when I'm sort of trying to hire and build a team. It's often the people who just live and breathe technology who are your go-to people, because you just know they'll be there because they love a challenge, they love what they do. And that's very difficult, I think, for people outside of IT to almost understand that these people have grown up doing this a lot of the time, and it's a passion for them. It's not just a job.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really apparent when kind of speaking to you today, just how passionate you are about it. And let's talk about Tastecard then. So you were brought in as their first technical board member. Is that right? What was that experience like? And how did you go about shaping the tech strategy, but taking that business on that journey, I guess, when they haven't had that level or influence before?
Yeah, I think I've done that several times. So there's lots of businesses that I've gone into. I've been the first sort of technical person, at a certain level, whether that's board level or just below it. And I think there's a common theme in terms of making sure you take the rest of the board on the journey. Making sure that they understand the challenges that you're going through. Now that is really difficult sometimes when you're so busy with your head knee deep in like build stuff. We just need to get on. And I think if there's stuff that I look back on through my career, then an advice that I would give people, and advice that I often kind of try and sort of fall back on myself, it's take other people on the journey with you. A lot of this sort of IT transformation isn't about IT transformation at all. It's about business transformation and about business change, and seeking opportunities for the business to grow in directions and being nimble enough to sort of pivot and move to different things. Tastecard was a challenging role, mainly because we had a lot of change going on within the business, new businesses being bought and new platforms being built, but also things that were in year were kind of competing with the future. So you have to kind of balance how do we solve the in-year problem and make sure we're not falling behind on sales, because the PE owners don't like you sort of falling backwards and showing a backwards trend. Nobody wants to see that. And how do you continue to build the future while that's happening? So that's a real sort of challenge, and especially when you're in a kind of tight budget situation where you there's not loads of money to throw at it, so you can't just go and solve the problem by saying, right, just get loads more people in.
Yeah.
You've got to balance that off and make sure that you're having the conversations about where you head and what your experience is of doing the things that you're actually trying to achieve.
And I know you've worked for a few private equity backed businesses. And you often, when you're working for a PE business, I know myself firsthand, because we are private equity backed, that it's a very results oriented relationship and partnership, and that can sometimes, I guess, be quite high pressured. And what's been your experience of leading in that environment, and how do you manage that pressure? And like you just talked about briefly then, managing that balance between we've got to deliver, we've got to keep the lights on, but also, we can't throw loads of money at a problem to fix it. We've got to innovate and move forward as well. How do you balance all of that, and particularly manage the pressure in that environment?
Yeah, it is high pressure. There's no doubt. I think working at Jet2 kind of helped me understand what pressure really is. Although obviously that's not a PE company. Anybody who's sort of worked at any sort of level within that business knows how that business runs, and it's very successful because it's really laser focused on what it does. And there's nothing that gets left on the table. When you're slipping, I've been in conversations around, when we're going through January sales and things aren't where they are, and people are kind of almost at the point where they're accepting that maybe the market's not great. And Steve, the leader, the CEO, is kind of like, no, that's not happening. We are going, this is not a market thing. We need to do better. I think I've taken a lot from that experience in terms of, not just accepting that things are as they are. There's always things that you can try and do. And at least if you're trying to do stuff, then you'll succeed. I think the private equity world is something that I enjoy. Often often you work in businesses where you don't have a clear understanding of why you're trying to do something or why you're trying to achieve it. The strategy is just sell more. And you're kind of like, yeah, but there's got to be more to the strategy than that. Like, how are we going to sell more? A lot of, private equity companies are very clear about why they're trying to do something and why you're trying to head in that direction. The separation work that I've just done at Warner, for instance. So Warner is part of Bourne Leisure. They owned Haven and Butlins and Warner when I arrived. Sold off Butlins about 6 months into my tenure. But it was really about trying to split the business, create a whole new entity for Warner, with everything that was being done was all led by group. And if you think about the names that I've just mentioned, Haven and Butlins are really big brands within the UK. Warner isn't. So when you're talking, everything is kind of bought at a group level and serviced at a group level. Warner was often the one that kind of just got hand-me-downs. So you'll just have, it's almost like think about Haven, then think about Butlins, then whatever's left Warner can have, kind of thing. So we've had to sort of totally pivot that on its head and think about how we build a structure and a capability, taking all of the things that are done at group level and moving them into either people within our team or suppliers that we've engaged with and put new contracts in place. Loads of discovery work around, what exactly do the group teams do for us? Because a lot of that was invisible. Things like IT security and stuff like that. Well, we didn't have to worry about that. That was group securities team would take care of all that for us. So doing all of that discovery and moving that into our teams has been massively challenging. As you can imagine, like picking apart a massive group structure, years and years of being combined, systems top to bottom, contracts top to bottom, infrastructure, networks, everything, moving everything into the cloud at the same time was a huge challenge. But you kind of know why you're doing it. There's a reason there for doing it, and there's a deadline. You rush towards that deadline and try and get it done. You get a lot more clarity, I think, working with private equity.
So I think in summary, having that clear vision and focus helps you channel, I guess, what you're trying to do and manage the pressure that you face. Just what you said about Jet2 being absolutely laser focused on what they do as a business was really interesting, because there definitely must have been a standout part of your career working for an organization like Jet2.
Absolutely.
Is that driven by the CEO, or is that a cultural thing that Jet2 has now created, do you think? Would that change if the CEO was to move on?
It's interesting. Somebody asked me this question a couple of weeks ago, and I was kind of like, yeah, I think it would be the way that the business has been built. It's kind of intrinsic to the business now. So I think in the early days, it was very much led from the front. Everybody was kind of almost dragged along, and it was kind of like, this is what we're doing. I think if you look at the people around I still know obviously a lot of the people around the board table and at the sort of at senior level there. Thankfully, I've got really good relationships with my old boss and things like that there. But if you look at those people, they are still massively driven to achieve and continue the success that they've had. That is when you look at back through my career, the second stint. So my first stint at Jet2 was very different to my second one. For instance, when I joined Jet2 the first time around, it was a challenge. We were in a hovel in Holbeck, probably one of the worst offices I've ever worked in.
I remember that location.
It was awful, wasn't it? I remember day one walking in, and they were known really for being an airline at that point. Now, I'd moved from south to north, never really heard of Jet2. It was only some of my friends up here who were kind of, oh, they're great. We always fly with them. It's a really great brand, which made me sort of take the job. Day one, I walked in, and it was literally mainly men in the office. Obviously, technology in them days was mainly men. So you're probably talking out of maybe 60 people in there, maybe 55 were men, and there was one men's toilet. It was like being on an aeroplane where you're literally queuing for the toilet on an aeroplane. It was awful, absolutely awful. And then we started obviously building out teams, doing holidays and things like that, which totally changed the way that the business worked. I then moved on, came back, I think about 4 years later. The team when I left, I think was up around sort of 40, maybe 50 people. The first time around, came back to a team of about 140. So that shows you the growth that they'd been through in that 4 years. And then when I came back, the business really needed to kick on technology wise. And it was at the same time that Sky Bet had moved in, Sky had moved in, Channel 4, I think, had just moved into, and Burberry, and there were all these companies sort of lobbing themselves into Leeds, and there just wasn't the amount of tech people around to fill all the roles. So it was hugely competitive. We ended up then opening an office in Sheffield to keep up with demand. So there was another 50 people we added there, but that still wasn't enough. So we ended up then going out to India, and that's probably, when I look back at my career, probably one of the biggest things that I've done is build a whole offshore captive centre in India. That is now, I think they're up to now about sort of 500 people working in that show. But when we first did that whole exercise, creating the entity, really thinking about, we did everything from sort of picking the handles on the toilet doors for the office. We literally sat there one day with all of this, this is the tiles you could have, these are the sort of the door canisters and things like that, and we literally sat and picked everything for the new office. I wanted glittery grout in because that's kind of being a footballer, that's the kind of thing that I would like. That actually had to come out because people were walking glitter everywhere around the office apparently. So they did away with that, but that was a hugely successful operation. We had to sell people on a business that they'd never heard of in India at a point in time where one of the major airlines in India had just gone bust. Right. So trying to convince people to come into an industry, they were kind of like, I'm not sure about it. And then we moved them into an office when they first joined with no windows, because we were still waiting for our office to be sort of fitted out and stuff. So really difficult to land. Making sure that the people in the UK sort of understood how that operation was going to work and bought into it was a huge challenge. And I think that the big breakthroughs there is when we started sort of sending people out to India to actually meet the people rather than just doing everything on sort of Teams calls. That's when the real sort of impetus started, and they started seeing these people as not only colleagues but friends in some cases as well. And I think that's really important. We went through COVID. Obviously there's lots of people now working remotely, and it's very difficult to keep that kind of team culture, and often I find people tend to stick around probably longer than they should in certain roles because they like the people that they work with.
Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, the Jet2 story is incredible, right? From in terms of what they have achieved as an organisation, but also the huge bumps in the road with COVID, and to become, a Yorkshire heritage business that's one of the most, I guess, prominent consumer facing brands in the UK now that we kind of get to, and the fact you've had that experience and taking, playing a part in the transformation that they've been on. I think it's important to show that things aren't always rosy, are they? What you see now is great organisation, but the kind of process that they had to get through, and the kind of, I guess, evolve. In terms of just when there's resistance to change, like, we don't have to necessarily talk about Jet2, but the transformation that they've been through as an organisation and other organisations, either from a business perspective or a technology perspective, how do you push through change when you get resistance from teams or from people within the business?
I think it's about really them trying to make them understand why the change is happening. I think, like most humans, you're resilient to or resistant to things that you don't understand or you don't see the logic behind. So I think a lot of the time it's the businesses do things because you either want to grow the business or change the business in terms of how it operates. Sometimes, obviously, the hardest thing to do as a technologist is tell the business you've got to do something from a technology point of view that actually won't move the business forward. But if you don't do it, then we're going to be, lagging behind and potentially have issues. That's a much harder sell. Solving tech debt is the CTO/CIO's, job to make sure that you're sweeping up behind. And a lot of the time, businesses are really resistant to that sort of thing because they don't see the benefit of spending the money. Now, in that period where I was away from Jet2, there was a product that Jet2 used extensively in a lot of back-end tooling called Silverlight, which Microsoft had peddled as like, this is the future. It was going to be like the thing that they got behind. I think about 18 months after they pulled the plug on it. And when I went back to Jet2, there was all this Silverlight run right the way across the business in financial systems and all sorts, and trying to convince people that we need to go back and sort of sweep up all of that stuff and move it forward when they wouldn't get loads of new functionality, because we didn't have time to build loads of new functionality is a really hard sell. And that's when I think your relationships with the sort of leaders of those areas really comes into the fore. I was quite lucky that some of the people in those areas were fairly tech savvy, and so that they understood the need for it, and when you sit them down and explain, look, in 18 months this is going to be unsupported, so if anything happens to it, literally we have nowhere to go, that suddenly then sparks a conversation about, okay, well, maybe we need to listen to this and maybe we do need to invest in it. And then think some of the other things that you can do is maybe put in some sweeteners in terms of, we'll try and improve the efficiency, or some of the things, the quirks that the systems do, we'll try and iron out as we go through those transformations.
Do you think then, from talking to you this morning, what's really apparent is your knowledge of the businesses that you've worked for, of how they operate as a business and their different functions is incredibly strong. And I think, the fact that you understand about businesses needing to be, having that vision and being laser focused on what they do. Do you think that role of the CTO role is evolving so much to be very blurred with being a business role now, and the same with, I guess, business leaders? Do you think that's how the role is evolving?
I absolutely do think that. I was thinking sort of, when you look back over like the difference between when I first started and maybe even sort of 5-10 years ago, you've got more CIOs and stuff sat on boards now. Most companies are realizing that technology is actually a really important part of their business, and without that focus on technology, then you fall behind your competitors. As a tech leader, it's probably let's say the only role, but for me, I have to go into a business and I have to understand probably more about the different areas across the business, but especially if you're doing big transformations in lots of different areas. So Warner's a prime example where we were doing, new finance system, we were doing new HR system, we're doing new central reservation system, we're doing operational changes to build efficiency. I have to know, not down to sort of, nuts and bolts level, but I have to know enough about those things. And because of it being not a massive business, often I'm dragged into, conversations about things that, I probably wouldn't need to get involved with if I'd done it at the same thing at Jet2, for instance, because I'd have probably 4 or 5 people in the team that I would just go look at this and bring back the detail. So having that understanding of being able to sort of go down to that level, and then raise yourself back up is really important. But I think, technology used to have, I think, a bit of a thing about it where lots of technologists would just like to build things because it's like, it's really cool to build all of this stuff, right? Great. What's the business purpose behind it? So I think the reason I sort of describe myself as a commercially aware CIO or CTO, because I can kind of do both roles and have done both roles, is because you have to play into, you know, understanding where the business wants to go, and then adjusting your roadmap to suit where the business needs to head, and unlocking the potential. I also see my role as bringing in some of the things that maybe the business won't be thinking of. So done lots of stuff, maybe like when we were at Asda, sort of visiting, you know, BT's innovation lab and things like that, and sort of looking at technology and kind of trying to find uses for it. You know, there's those things where you kind of go, actually, maybe if we open this up to the business might find some uses for it. So done lots of things like that in my career as well.
Amazing. Just want to delve a little bit deeper into that, particularly around, you know, using technology to help the business achieve what it needs to achieve. Let's talk about kind of build versus buy, which I know is a kind of decision that you've had to make in various different environments. But given the world that we're in today, where businesses are really cost conscious right now, I think would be fair to say, and under pressure with either timelines or budgets. How do you approach that today? I appreciate it will change depending on the organization, but when you're looking at that as an approach.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've always sort of had in my head is, if it's a commodity thing and doesn't set us apart from other businesses, if it doesn't give us competitive advantage, then why would we build it? You know, if there's that one of the problems that we've had in other businesses that I've worked in is lots of things have been built just because the technology team like to build things, right? And that's often not the right way to go, because then you end up with a huge support overhead. You end up with things that go, you know, out of date, which then, as I mentioned before, things like Silverlight, where you build something and then it needs a whole new overhaul. So I tend to sort of, particularly if you look at my role in Warner, one of the things that I went into was, right, you need to understand exactly, you know, how you're going to solve these problems. And because I had the string to my bow where I could build a technology team, you know, I've built lots of technology teams who are able to build products, build services, etc. Or you need to go out to market and find people who will do this for you. When you look at the sort of cost to build and then maintain, that's the thing that you've got to really think about for the business. How are they going to maintain this? Is it something that we're going to continually need to make changes in? Is it something that the business is going to want to continually make changes in? And what's the best bang for our buck if we go down one or either route? Now, sometimes I've ended up in a place where you might do a mix of both, right? So you might take an off-the-shelf product that does 90% of what you need it to, but actually the other 10% you can only get by building something and maybe taking the data out, you know, manipulating the data, putting it back in, or taking the data out and moving it and doing something else with it over in a different system. I think that comes down to obviously understanding the business problem you're trying to solve, and then figuring out, you know, the right architecture, the right ways of working around the business at the right cost to move that forward.
And how have you had to adapt in your role when businesses have the ethos of and having to do more with less? How do you adapt when you're heading up a technology strategy?
Yeah, that's probably, you know, a lot of the time businesses, I think most businesses that I've worked in have either gone through, you know, reorganization, you know, in roles. You know, if you have a look at, you mentioned COVID earlier, one of the biggest sort of challenges that I went through personally was going through COVID at the same time as going through divorce, at the same time as trying to, you know, downsize a team, put a load of people on furlough and keep people within the business, because travel wasn't a particularly brilliant place to be at that point. As you know, it was all shut down. Now, thankfully at Jet2, with the, you know, the guys there had snaffled lots and lots of money away, and you know, we always kept the customer money separate. So when people were asking for money back, we had the money sat there. Lots of airlines and travel companies didn't have that, and that's why they were sort of balking at giving people their money back. That got us a lot of good kudos in the with our customer base, and lots of good press out of that as well.
I remember
it was a really
Jet2 brand
absolutely
was really well preserved during that period.
Absolutely, it was. Yeah, it was brilliant. And Jet2 is one of those brands that you look at, and you look at online, and if people start sort of saying bad things about the brand, there's about 100 people will jump on and tell them to shut up. It's kind of like, I always use these guys, right? It's a really, really well done. And it's like that for a reason, because that's what they drum into their people. Customer service, that's what we're here for. We give people what they need. And it's doing a good thing, right? Sending people on holiday is a great thing to do for people. But I think, it's often that was a particularly challenging time just to kind of get through that and get the organization through it, change the way that we were doing business, change the way that we were working as a team. Trying to do things remotely was hard to start with, but actually we were kind of used to doing bits and pieces remotely anyway, because of the way that we'd sort of set up the function. So it's but that again is something that you can mark down as huge experience. Most places, as I said, that I've worked at have been through some kind of rationalization, reorganization, and businesses should constantly be looking at that, right? You need to make sure that you've got the right people on the pitch to deliver your strategy, but also at the right cost base, and where you've got gaps, you might need to consolidate roles, etc., etc. So that's what, as any leader in technology will tell you, you're constantly asked to cut costs, looking at your vendors. So, can you get stuff done cheaper? Looking at potentially the way that you deliver services for the business. So, I've worked in businesses where I've walked in and they've got sort of 24-hour support on certain systems, and you're kind of like, well, that only gets used for 8 hours a day. Why do we need 24-hour support? Clearly, I've done a lot of offshoring. So part of what we did at Jet2 and Asda, was to move stuff offshore to keep costs down, and also to find skills that we needed. So, I've talked about it earlier, everybody moving into Leeds, we struggled to get data people, we struggled to get mobile people. We solved that by building out a team in India. And actually, if you look at the results that we got from that, a mobile app, I think we were at something like 2.8 in the App Store when I came back and took it over. We were up at 4.8 by the time I left. So we went from being the worst in the industry to one of the best in the industry. We'd have only been able to do that if we'd been able to scale out in India and find the right talent.
And I guess we have to touch on emerging technologies, which is a big part of your role, and absolutely, how companies adopt Gen AI, machine learning. And where have you seen these technologies create the most meaningful or biggest business impact so far, given that AI is such a hot topic for organizations at the moment?
It absolutely is a hot topic. And I think it's weird because everybody kind of, when you think about technology terms and, things that people know outside of technology, everybody knows AI now, right? Because every single product that you use, whether it uses AI or not, is saying we've got AI. Yeah, it's kind of like, this is all AI, and people go, wow, that's great. We should definitely have that. So I have a sort of thing in my head where I'm kind of like, is it really AI, or is it machine learning, or is it just computing? Right? It's you're just building software. So I think that the big thing, obviously, with generative AI is making sure that in terms of businesses using it, you need the right governance and data to feed it, so it makes the right decisions. Obviously, you need to choose the right models and things like that. From a business point of view, take Warner, for instance, we've just implemented an AI chatbot, which is kind of leaps and bounds above the chatbot that we've just replaced. The good thing about those things is that not only are they much more intuitive for people to use, because I think a lot of people, certainly with chatbots in the early days of chatbots, you were kind of like, I know I'm talking to a chatbot because this is so staid, it's unbelievable, right? The new ones that we're putting in now, like leaps and bounds above those things, but then they can also carry out actions off the back of them as well. So moving into actually being able to service a customer who's asking about a particular thing and turn that into a sales channel is really important for a business, because they've not had the opportunity to have that as a sales channel before, because it's only ever been focused on customer service, maybe deflecting calls, so that your call center will be call center costs will be lower. Most of the businesses that I've worked for over the past 10-15 years have had call centers. Hermes, where's my parcel? That's the one thing that we solve that by actually doing something online and moving a load of calls off there. Obviously, Jet2 as a big call center. Again, we did lots of work to try and deflect calls from there. Warner, we've just put that in. I think that's probably, when you look at the customer side of things, being able to do things like product placement on websites. We implemented an Optimizely platform about 2 years ago. Now we're moving into, how do we take people on that journey and like journeys? If somebody's bought something on a particular journey, and it send people down that journey again, because it that might be our most lucrative one. And then you have to think about the workforce as well. So, being more efficient in your job, starting now to get into using lots of things in my personal life, not only generating daft images for people to see, Liverpool holding the Premier League trophy up and things like that above Old Trafford and stuff, but actually, in daily use. Obviously, as you know, I'm leaving my role in September, and sort of, the way that I've curated my CV this time is totally different to anything that I've done before. Trying to sort of, tell ChatGPT to revise this, make it more concise, make it more business focused and stuff. Now, that's great. It does bring challenges with it, and I'm sure you're seeing this in your industry, but lots of people that I'm talking to in recruitment are running into the same problems that businesses will run into. You put a job out there, you've suddenly got loads and loads of CVs that claim to know exactly what they're talking about. Yeah, exactly that. And lots of recruitment agents are saying, like, I'm not posting jobs anymore, because as soon as you post a job on LinkedIn or whatever, there's 400 applicants. Most of them are absolutely useless and no good for the job. So it's not worth me even sifting through all of those things. And actually, finding the truth in some of these things is going to be the real difficult bit, because AI will do so much for you. Where's the human, the bit that actually is the sensible bit, and the bit that's actually going to deliver something.
I guess that's when your interpersonal skills and abilities to influence, build relationships, negotiate are going to become so much more important than ever before. I won't go into the whole recruitment aspect, because that's a much bigger conversation.
Absolutely.
In terms of how we tackle that. But it's definitely going to be an interesting time to watch how AI impacts organisations, and organisations embrace it in the right way, I guess. Coming on to talk a little bit about personal growth, and for you, how you've developed on a personal level across your career. I would like to say, was there a kind of mentor or a standout person in your career that's had a real lasting impact on you, or on how you might manage or lead today?
Yeah, I think there's been a number of people. Obviously, I've worked in lots of different organisations where the leadership styles have been sort of totally different. And if I think back to sort of early days, there's probably more that I learned from people that where I wouldn't do things the way that I would. Yeah, I mean, and this is probably a symptom of where we've come from, right? Often it was the most technical guy in the building that would be pushed up to the top, had zero personal skills, zero management skills, but would be the one that was kind of like in charge of hiring, in charge of, the whole way that the business technology function ran. And that's often the worst thing that you can do, keeping people who are technical in their technical lane and giving them the tools to do and drive and things like that is really something that I learned, a few years back, when I'm getting these people coming up to me and saying, I want a pay rise and I want to go into this role. And I'm kind of like, not sure it's really for you, but we can kind of create a track which leads you up to the top of architecture rather than lead you up to the top of management, because that's where I see your skills lying. There's people like Gary Isaacs at Jet2, who you probably know, but really great guy. I think it helps when you have similar thought processes, ways of, things that you like and things that you have in common. Gary, unfortunately, is a Tottenham fan, but other than that, really, really great guy. I've learned a lot as well there's a guy out in India called Surab Limay, who owns a company called Data Action, who I've used to build Jet2 travel technologies. Still very much involved in obviously Jet2, and they do lots of work for people like TUI and Reed and Mackay. Great guy to bounce things off. We've got a really good friendship, an open friendship, where we can sort of just ring each other and say, what do I do about this? How would I approach it? I've got probably more of an empathetic lens than he has, but he's got often a really good sort of business lens of, actually, no, this is how you could solve that problem. So having people who have different skills to you is often, the best place to be. And I think that's something that I've learned over time as well, is that I think in my early days, I tried to get everybody who was just like me in my team, right? So I wanted people who were passionate. I wanted people who were, I was going to say devilishly handsome and funny, but that's daft. But I wanted people who were, you know, who would as driven as me, who would be, I could stick in front of somebody and they could talk to them about things. And then you kind of realize, actually, we don't need all of that. There's a real good mix of analytical people that I need. I've got a guy in my team at the moment who is often my conscience, right? Because I'm kind of like, no, let's just get on with it. Let's do this. Let's, like, you know, let's deliver. Let's ride roughshod over this, because that's what the business wants us to do. And he'll bring me back to, hold on, you should probably consider this. And I think that's something that I, you know, as you go through life and you learn what you're good at and what you're not good at, surrounding yourself with people who plug your gaps is really, really important.
Absolutely. And when you're operating in, you know, high pressure, high stakes environment, like the technology carve out that you've just done at Bourne Leisure, we already talked about some of the other assignments and roles that you've delivered. How do you personally manage that stress and balance with work and life to stay focused, but also make sure that you fit well and healthy as well?
Yeah, it's something I've struggled with, actually, as we were talking before this, around sort of travel and, you know, having to travel long distances for work and stuff. Over the last sort of 3 years doing the, you know, multiple journeys down the M1 to Hemel Hempstead has been difficult to look after myself personally. You know, fitness and health is something that I've been sort of massively into for years. Obviously, you know, in my earlier days, as I said, lots of sport. As you get older, you get less time to do those sorts of things and less focus on it. And I got to the point end of last year where I was 50 and I kind of sat down and went, geez, like, I'll be dead if I carry on going like this. I need to, you know, that might be an over exaggeration, but I need to really think about my work-life balance and how I'm treating my body, and, you know, and really the people that I'm spending time around and want to spend more time around. So that's kind of the reason that I'm leaving my current role, is to try and get a better work-life balance, to, you know, working in a place that's easier to get to and you know, that will fit more with the lifestyle that I want to achieve. If I think back to years gone by, obviously most of the roles that I've had have been high pressure, you know, either delivery or, you know, the service side of the business. You know, when you're at Asda, you have to make sure everything's running for all of the stores. Jet2 the same, you know, you can't have a website that's down, or, you know, people not being able to update prices, etc., etc. So that and the thing that I've kind of always come back to is, it's not the end of the world, right? Things go wrong. You have to accept that in technology, even the best systems, there will be things that go wrong. You're paid to care. You're paid to care 24/7 if you're a director and at that level, but also making sure that you've got the right people to handle those things when they go wrong, so that you're not constantly thinking, I have to be there because I don't trust my team to deal with it. A lot of the time I'm sort of dealing with the stakeholders, you know, the management, keeping the management informed, etc., while the team are kind of getting on and fixing stuff. Because obviously, hanging up my keyboard many years ago, I'm not that good at fixing stuff anymore. I still find the occasional bug and get things fixed, and I can still sort of point people in the direction of things that might be wrong and get those done. But yeah, I think that's sort of, and then really starting to think about how you look after yourself, making sure that you plan holidays is a big thing. Again, I've got into a different mindset over the last 3 years that I'm moving back into now, but making sure you've got a break at certain times, even if it's just a long weekend, you know, to go away, recharge, do something nice, go to a spa for a weekend, go away for a weekend, and, you know, go to Rome like I did the other week. You know, those are the sorts of things that you have to make time for, and make sure that you're still giving your head a break.
Absolutely. I guess when you're so passionate about the business that you work for, keeping that perspective that everything's fine, we've done our best. I always try and say to people, we're not the fourth emergency service here, guys. Keep perspective. As long as you've done your absolute best in a situation, that's all you can do. But when you're so passionate, that's quite a hard thing to temper, isn't it? With caring too much it's kind of like it's a really lovely, great strength to have, but it's something you've got to temper.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've been guilty in the past of, especially when you look at roles like Asda. I didn't have a great sort of, I didn't have a full leadership team, and I didn't have a particularly strong leadership team when I first took over. And that's kind of something that, again, when you go through learnings, not everything is rosy from end to end in your career. And you probably learn more in adversity than you do in success, right? Everybody says that, and that's definitely true. So I think if you look back at that role particularly, I took a lot away from that role because I was kind of thinking I probably made changes too slowly. Yeah, I should have gone in, I should have gone heavy on some of the changes that I did end up making, because
Yeah.
I kind of knew that they weren't right.
Yeah.
Um, but then there's a balancing act as well, of sometimes you need to understand things a little bit longer to actually think about, like, actually, is that right? Because you can jump to conclusions very, very quickly as well. With first interactions, for instance, you kind of go, God, like, what is that person? But then, like, 2-3 weeks later, you might have a totally different experience, and it might have just been because that person was having a bad day, or was under pressure themselves. I tend to be somebody who leans on a bit of jovial comedy to keep myself sane. I keep my teams sane by doing that. Nothing is that bad that we should be, giving people heart palpitations and things like that. And it's often that kind of level-headed thinking of, listen, we're in a stressful situation. It ain't going to make anything better if we heighten that stress by not getting on with each other and not focusing on what we need to do. And that kind of logic then disappears once you're in a flat state of panic.
Yeah.
So keeping logical, keeping things light-hearted, keeping things fun, making sure that everybody's fed and watered. I've spent many an hour overnight, in offices locked in when everybody else has gone home and we're trying to solve problems. Making sure that people have got food and they've got drink and things like that is my role. I often describe myself as chief cheerleader in my role now, because it is about, keeping everybody happy, and the people that are doing the work, as I used to be the one that doing the work, look after them, make sure that they've got everything they need to succeed, and you won't go far wrong.
Excellent. Great advice. I'm just going to, before we wrap up, just I guess one piece of advice for somebody who might be watching today or listening today, who's kind of on that trajectory and almost on the cusp of stepping into their first technology leadership role at a senior level. What's the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I think it is, stay true to yourself. So I think, you can adapt yourself, you can change, you can learn, but also if you're working in something that you love, it's much easier to give your all and give your focus, give your attention. Make sure you've got the balance right and you're doing things for the right reasons. So I've seen often people jump into roles just because they think, great, it's loads more money, it's got and I've turned down roles before where I've actually thought, hold on a minute, the balance of my life is going to shift here, particularly when I had sort of young kids at home. It's important that you don't sort of regret that whole time of just focusing on work and kind of nothing else matters. Relationships and, especially with your family and your kids and things like that are super important. So not losing sight of that is really key. And then find something that you really love and that you are passionate about and you have a natural affinity with. Often I see people in work who just look miserable. And I kind of think, well, you don't have to do this job, right? There's other jobs out there. Now some people are there out of necessity, right? And you're never going to get away with that from that. Some jobs aren't particularly exciting. I'm lucky that I have an exciting job, or one that I'm passionate about. I'm often, looking for people with that passion in my teams and passion for technology, etc. But yeah, stay true to yourself. Learn off good people and learn off bad people.
Great advice. Kevin, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much
No
for
problem at
your
all.
time and joining me.
No worries at all. Thank you.